Hey there, I am back with another deck review, and today we're going to be looking at Beowulf, the December deck from the King's Wild Shorts line. I highly recommend checking out King's Wild Shorts if you haven't already. It's the monthly subscription service from King's Wild Project and designer Jackson Robinson. And it's really the series where Jackson lets his creativity run wild, creating a completely different deck every single month. And you can really see all of the different varied inspirations that he draws his decks from. And this one is absolutely no exception. Now, this is actually in a lot of ways a follow-up to the Robin Hood deck from a few months back, also produced as part of the Shorts line, in that both of them are part of this literature series that he's doing. He's doing decks that are all inspired by books and literature throughout history. So Robin Hood was the first, Beowulf is the second, and this one is inspired by the epic poem that was set in the 6th century in what is today known as Denmark. Now, it's one of the most significant writings in the world, despite the fact that we don't even know who the author is, but it's read in English classes everywhere as a significant epic poem of the time. So that was the inspiration. We'll get more into the story of Beowulf as we go through the deck, but let's start out by looking at the tuck case. And just like the Robin Hood deck, it's designed to look like a book in your hand. It does a really fantastic job of it. It's done on this matte, almost soft touch stock, and the background or the printing on it is meant to mimic leather, and specifically old and worn leather. I mean, you can see the scratches and cracking all the way through that really kind of gives you that authentic feel. Really beautifully done texturing on this one. And then it's embellished all the way throughout with tons of embossing and gold foil. You can see that gleaming in the light there. You have the name of the book, Beowulf, and then lots of these little design elements that are kind of Celtic inspired, a little bit inspired by Celtic knots and things like that, giving really beautiful imagery all the way around. And as you zoom in, you can see almost like a stitching that's done around this, almost like these elements are stitched onto the cover. Really nice image to it. Turning to the side, you get the spine of the book, complete with Beowulf mentioned again, so you can kind of line these up on a shelf with your other book decks. And then the back continues that same leather-bound cover design with gold foil elements and embossing. And you even get a nice little touch here, a little spatter of blood, almost like this book was part of the story itself. So beautifully done. This other 3 sides are all meant to mimic the pages of the book, so you get the kind of completing that illusion of this being a book. You do get a little bit of printing, so on the bottom you get some ad copy for Jackson Robinson and King's Wild Project. Also mentions Expert Playing Card Company, who printed this deck. The top has 1 Thessalonians 4:11. That's Jackson's signature Bible verse. You'll see that mentioned on a lot of his decks. And then on the side, you have this old English phrase here. It says, and I'm going to try to not butcher the pronunciation too much, it says, "Kom on wandre nicht, Shridan Sheduyenga," which loosely speaking translates to, "He came in the dark night, the Shadow Walker." And that's a reference to one of the main antagonists from the story, Grendel. And again, we'll talk about him in a second, but very cool and almost mysterious entry into the book. The tuck case opens from the side, kind of unique, but if you saw the Robin Hood deck, does more of the same. Has this gigantic tuck flap here with more of that Celtic imagery emblazoned against the leather texture. And then you have number 13 on the inner flaps here, common theme you'll see in a lot of King's Wild decks. And then more leather printing on the interior. So nothing else printed, just that more of that leather texture. So beautifully designed tuck case. Definitely in keeping with the book theme, and I think this one would look fantastic on any shelf. But let's get into the cards, and we'll start with the back design. And here it is. Now, the back design draws a lot of inspiration from some of the stave churches that you'll find in the Scandinavian area. Stave churches are these beautiful churches that are built out of gigantic wooden timbers, and they would often have these wooden reliefs carved inside. So a lot of the artwork was done in carved wood. And so this back design and the entire deck is meant to pay an homage to those churches and some of the beautiful relief artwork. Now, you'll see it's done against a dark brown background. It's a little bit hard to see here, but there is a slight wood texture on there. So that's kind of the base color of the wood. And then you see all these elements that are given this sort of 3D effect, almost like they've been carved into the back of the card. So you have these big arches, similar to what you might find in a church, in those stave churches there, going over the top. And then this helmet is sort of drawing your attention. This is an homage to something called the Sutton Hoo helmet. It's a helmet slash crown that was unearthed in an archaeological dig a while back. One of the most significant artifacts from the time. It's a really striking helmet, and so that's what Jackson drew upon to form this other design element here in the center. You have more bars through the center, kind of reminiscent of the crosses that you'd find, or the timbers that you'd find in the churches, and all of it's accented with tons of gold foil. So it's on a glossy finish to the back design, but lots of gold foil to really kind of set some of those elements off. You can see Celtic designs that are made out, more of the background of the wood here, almost like the wood itself has been painted or gilded. It's a really cool effect. I personally think it's a little bit in your face, I think, for a back design. I would have preferred that maybe the gold had been toned back just a little bit. Gives it a little bit of a gleam if you want to view this as a functional deck, but as a piece of art, it really, really stands out. So I think beautifully done on the back design nonetheless. So that's the back, but let's look at the cards. And we'll start out with the Ace of Spades. Ace of Spades is definitely the power ace in this one, and it is covered with gold foil. So you get these two big bars down the side, and that's going to follow through on all the cards that feature the pip and the index, again carved into the wood there. Nice, fairly easy to read despite the fact that they're very uniquely styled. And then these Celtic knot inspired bars of gold foil running down the sides. Beautifully designed. The center image here features the large spade pip, another appearance of that Sutton Hoo helmet with the sword going in the background, and then all the rest of the blank space filled up with more of that Celtic knot imagery. Beautifully designed, really striking artwork on this one. Now the other three aces are not nearly as ornate. They just feature the smaller pip in the center, again carved into the wood, and you'll see the different suits kind of feature slightly different shades of wood. So you have everything from the clubs here with that much darker wood, and then the diamonds on almost kind of a reddish wood. So you get some kind of different variations between the different suits. So again, beautifully designed. Every single one of these, even the quote simple aces, are all beautifully accented with gold foil and given a fully custom look. The number cards follow the same pattern as those aces, feature the pips in the center, almost kind of a painted element. So the spades here almost painted in blue and then outlined in that gold foil. And all the way through, pretty standard layout to the pips, although it's definitely condensed a lot just because those bars on the side take up a lot of the space. So it gives you a little bit of a crowded look as you get to some of the higher numbers, but I love that they're done in that crude style that you would see in some of these ancient carvings. There's the diamonds, now done with more of a red paint and a different color wood background, and then into the clubs, back to a super dark, almost black background to these, and closing out with the hearts. And you can really see just how random and off kilter each one of the pips carved to look just a little bit different from the ones around it. So it gives you some nice variation and imperfections in the design that I think really lend to a nice design overall. So that is the number cards, and now we're going to get into the quartz, and we're going to talk about the story of Beowulf as we go through the quartz. Before we do that, say just a couple of words about the style of these. Now, much like before, the quartz are kind of condensed to a much smaller area in the center, just like we saw with the number cards, in large part because he puts these large banners down the side. I think it's a great choice personally overall. I think it just lends itself to what, kind of the more ancient feel to the deck overall. I think it is just fitting for the art style to kind of have these bars on the side and that with a much smaller relief carved in the center. I think it's a really great design decision and a striking one overall. But the center image here is also done in that relief carving style. So you can see the two-way characters on each side, and they're all beautifully and uniquely designed. As you flip through, you can see all of the different characters from the story featured throughout. And lots of detailing in there. I'll try to zoom in here so you can see some of that detailing all the way through, almost like it's carved into the wood and then painted over. So you can see the elements where you have this sort of faded bluish gray color over here, or the white in the beard. And then of course, more gold foil. So lots of the design elements here are accented in that gold foil to really just help different elements like the crown or the bracers here just pop off with that gold foil. Now, I did say I was going to get to the story of this one, and I am. So let's talk about who some of the characters are on these beautifully designed cards. And we'll start the story off with the King of Diamonds. This is really where the story opens out, and it's with the legendary and great King Hrothgar. He's the leader of the Danes and a legendary hero in his own right. But as the story opens up, he's kind of in his later years. But one of his greatest symbols of his rule over the Danes is this central mead hall that he constructed called Heorot. So beautiful hall where there would be celebrations and festivals and drinking and feasts that were held there. But for 12 years, there's an ogre named Grendel who was terrorizing the mead hall basically every night, killing warriors and raiding Heorot every night. So the Jack of Spades depicts Grendel, one of the main antagonists of the story. Depicted as an ogre here, munching on a bone, just this kind of vicious and scary looking ogre. Now, obviously, Hrothgar wants to get rid of this ogre, but for years he's unable to find anybody who's up to the task, and so Grendel just continues to savage his kingdom nightly. That is until our hero Beowulf shows up. Now, Beowulf is a young warrior from a place called Geatland nearby, and he offers his aid in attempting to kill Grendel, largely in order to enhance his own reputation. And so Beowulf is actually successful. He waits one night, and when Grendel comes and attacks, he actually tears off Grendel's arm. And so here on the King of Spades, you can see him clutching the arm that he's just freshly ripped off of Grendel. Beautiful image on this one. This is probably my favorite of the courts. It really captures that old style incredibly well, and I love the sort of imagery of the arm there. But this isn't the end of the story. So the Danes are celebrating Beowulf's great victory, but Grendel's mother actually seeks out revenge. She steals back the claw of Grendel and ultimately kills one of the royal family that night. So you can see her here, the old hag, the old witch, clutching her son's arms in her hand, her son's arm in her hand as she's kind of recaptured that trophy. Now, obviously, Hrothgar and Beowulf can't let that stand, and so they decide to track Grendel's mother down to her underground cave, where Beowulf ultimately defeats her in kind of his second battle. Now, Beowulf then returns to Geatland, having been successful in defeating not just Grendel, but also Grendel's mother, where ultimately he becomes king of Geatland and rules for 50 years himself. But years later, he kind of comes across his final battle, where he must defeat a great dragon who is ravaging his kingdom. And so he goes after the dragon, accompanied by this guy here on the King of Clubs. This is Wiglaf, I believe is how you pronounce his name, one of his most loyal retainers, and the two of them go together to defeat the dragon. And I love here that Wiglaf is holding this broken sword, because during the battle, Beowulf's sword is actually broken. And the battle ultimately is the end of Beowulf. He's mortally wounded, so while they do defeat the dragon, he's mortally wounded. And that final battle is depicted here on these amazing diptych jokers that are included with the deck. So this is the depiction of the battle of Beowulf pictured here with that dragon over here on the left. Beautiful imagery, the dragon spitting fire that's all done in this Celtic knot pattern. And then there's Beowulf standing against the mighty dragon. So beautiful diptych joker to just kind of close out the story. So that is the tale. That's not all the courts, though. A lot of the other courts depict what are some of the more minor characters that are mentioned throughout the story. For example, the Jack of Diamonds, this is Unferth. He's actually one of Hrothgar's warriors. And back when Beowulf was saying he was going to go fight Grendel, Unferth was one of the ones who basically insulted and doubted Beowulf prior to his battle, but ultimately turned when he realized that Beowulf was successful. The Queen of Diamonds, this is definitely a way more minor character in this one. This is Waltheo, I believe is how you pronounce her name. She's the wife of Hrothgar and the one who hosted the banquets in the mead hall, including the celebration banquet where they were celebrating the defeat of Grendel. And so you can see her there, her role as a hostess symbolized by that golden chalice that she's holding in her hands. Going to the Jack of Clubs, the Jack of Clubs depicts Hrothulf, who's actually Hrothgar's nephew. So definitely a more minor character in this one, there with the spear in hand. The Queen of Clubs, another minor character. This one is Hildeberg. She's a Danish princess, and actually she's only mentioned in one of the stories. So when they would have these feasts at the mead hall, they would tell different stories of legendary rulers or warriors, and so she was one of the ones who was mentioned there. Interestingly, she played the role of what's called a peace weaver. Basically, her marriage was one to basically cement a union between two kingdoms that were maybe otherwise warring, and so here she's depicted actually weaving on a loom there, since she is herself a peace weaver. All right, the Jack of Hearts. Jack of Hearts, this is Ashera. Basically one of Hrothgar's trusted advisors, and actually when Grendel's mother sought revenge on Hrothgar and Beowulf, he was actually killed within that, but he's one of the advisors, so that's kind of symbolized by the scroll and the staff that he's carrying. By the way, incidentally, on this one, if you check out Kingswald Project's YouTube channel, you can actually see the entire process of him drawing this card. Definitely great to check out. You get a few more insights and just get to watch the entire process of a card getting created. So I'll put a link down in the description if you want to see that one. Definitely a video worth checking out. So 2 more to go here. Queen of Hearts. There weren't many female characters in this one, so had to go to some of the very obscure characters to draw on some of the queens here. But this one is Modthrith, Queen of Legend, who is only really mentioned in another one of the stories from the mead hall. And she had a treacherous side to her, and that's why you see her holding the dagger. And last but not least is the King of Hearts. This is Hugelac. Basically, this is the king of Beowulf's home country, Geatland, and Beowulf's uncle. So he's a significant ruler in his own right, and you see him there in that traditional suicidal king position with that orb as sort of a symbol of his office there. So that is the last of the court cards, all beautifully drawn and designed. Now, handling of this deck, just getting back to the deck aspect of this one, you know, if you picked up some of the earlier ones, including the Robin Hood deck, some of these super gilded decks don't handle or fan particularly well, but Jackson has been working on that, and these actually fan surprisingly well. Definitely kind of a slippery feel to them. I will say, though, there's some oddities about this if you're looking at this as a fully functional deck. They kind of leave it a little bit, you know, just unusual for me. It's definitely a significantly fatter deck than your regular deck, like noticeably so. You'll notice it right as you pick it up. So if you're used to a regular deck, and especially if you're used to some of the slimmer ones like Cardamundi Slimline or something like that, you're going to notice right away how thick both the deck and the tuck are. And the finish on this one is really unusual. It's a super, super glossy finish to it, much more so than regular cards. And I think that distracts a little bit from the design, but it does really enhance the handling in this one overall. So kind of a mixed bag in terms of the stock of the cards themselves. You know, this isn't going to be one that you're going to be, you know, going to for cardistry or anything like that. So I don't think it holds it back too much, but I am impressed with how much the handling of these has improved. You know, if you compare this to some of the older expert decks that he's been printing this year. Go back to the legal tender decks if you want to see one where it really struggled with some of the handling, but definitely making huge strides there. So that is the look at Beowulf. Now, there are a couple of other versions of the deck with the subscription. This is the standard version of the deck. Nothing very standard about it, but it is the standard edition. You can also get the limited edition, and I also get that one here. Very similar overall, has a lot of the same design elements. You can definitely see that the tuck case is amped up a little bit, a few extra design elements, a little bit of splash of color in there. And on the spine of the book, you get an extra little sticker here that gives you a numbering in this one. So I get number 265 out of the 500 limited edition. But otherwise, fairly similar tuck case, and the cards inside are exactly the same. So this is more a collector's thing than anything else. Now, what about uses of the deck? Well, I think I've kind of said it enough to say, hey, this is going to be a deck that, while there's a lot of elements that probably make it a reasonably functional deck for gameplay, I guess, definitely unique but still functional deck, this is really an art deck above all else. So that's really where this is going to find its home. You're going to want to put this on a shelf, appreciate it. You're going to want to open it up and really look at and appreciate the beautiful artwork on every single card. And I think that's really where this is going to, find its place. So that's it. That is the look at Beowulf from King's Wild Project. Hope you enjoyed, and hey, make sure to subscribe for more deck reviews and unboxings, and let me know what you'd like to see in the future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you for the next one.